I have the privilege of doing the intro today for the last session of the Beyond Jung and Living Synchronicity. It's been quite a meaty series, and I have to admit the things that I've learned are still to be pondered onward. I'm going to start again with a wee anecdote because it's an additional chapter to something that I mentioned last week, and that was a synchronicity associated with this book, and that is The Playful Universe, and that's put out by Academy for Post-Materialist Sciences, and that's Marjorie Wollicott, David Wollmer, and Gary E. Schwartz. But it's a lovely tome of collected things, and Roderick's in here. That's why it's pertinent to this, but it's also pertinent for the stories of the synchronicities that it's sort of spawned. If you were present last week, I gave you a couple of the intro ones, and there's one additional. But from traveling, I came to the post office here where I live in a dusty little town on the border, and I was opening my mail, tearing open this particular package, and then this was The Playful Universe, is what I pulled out of the envelope. And there was a gentleman walking behind me, and I know him, I don't know him well, and he looks over my shoulder and he goes, "The Playful Universe, what is that about?" So spontaneously, for a couple minutes there, we talked about synchronicity and what they were. And in that moment, he goes, I've heard that word. I didn't really understand, what it meant beyond a sort of a lay adoption of it. And then a couple of days later, I just happened to bump into the same guy again. And he goes, "Synchronicities, I think I've had some of those." And it was a very brief crossing. And so we continued on our way. And then this last week, I run into the same gentleman again. And he goes, "I was thinking about synchronicities, and I know I've had some really meaningful ones." He goes, "In fact, I've had one today." And he went home and he ordered this book. And so fascinatingly, there's another chapter to come, because I'm traveling, he's going to get his book. And after he reads it, we're going to have a little lunch meeting and talk about synchronicity. So it's just a delightful series of them. And being through the medium of a book, I've always delighted in the stories of the library angel, where some text or book or something falls into somebody's lap, sometimes literally on the head, that has the meaning or the look or the information they're looking for that does have some significance in their life. So this story to me is so delightfully associated with a series in a beautiful way. Also, the last chapter is not yet written. It may well be talking of synchronicities in a playful universe. It may be meaningful in this young man's life for whatever's next in it. So onward from that one, I don't need to talk more. Don't need to introduce Roderick with his credentials anymore. His BA and MA from Oxford, a PhD, University of Lancaster, now at Exeter. But you come to know him through this series by his deep scholarship and also his personal connection to the phenomenon of the synchronicities. It sort of drives, I understand, or at least I sense, his engagement with the topic. So it's going to be a little bit different format from this point. I'll hand it over to Roderick, and Richard and Roderick know each other well and their work well. So the dynamic from that point forward will be between them, because they can say things far more insightfully than me standing on the side and not knowing their work to the degree they do. So at this point, I hand it over to Roderick, and thank you for curating this lovely series. I think it's been enriching for everyone that's been there.
Thank you very much, Todd, and thank you for giving a little plug to the Playful Universe as well. I see Marjorie is on the call as well, so she'll be pleased about that too. So it's a really special pleasure and privilege for me to introduce today's speaker, Richard Berengarten, the last speaker in our series. Richard and I actually met first in 2009 in London at the UK launch of Jung's Red Book. So that's very appropriate for the sort of Beyond Jung series. And in fact, it was I don't know whether it's quite a synchronistic meeting, but as I recall, you mistook me for somebody else, I turned out not to be who you thought I was, but nevertheless a good friendship and for me a very inspiring sort of series of interactions have resulted from that. So it was one of those very happy moments. One of the reasons I have been so excited and privileged, I feel, to get to know Richard is that he's a poet who's been working as a poet for many decades. I take that in the best possible way. and yet he's also deeply understands Jungian psychology, and in particular the phenomenon of synchronicity. And as I've got to know Richard, I've had many conversations and discussions about the interrelation of those two phenomena, and sort of confirms for me my own intuitions about the deep connections between synchronicity, and those discussions have sort of helped me, for myself anyway, to sort of come to my own view of poetry in a sense as a form of applied synchronicity. Perhaps that's a bold way of putting it, but that's how I see it anyway. And I, you know, it's not a sort of an incidental interest in Richard's work. I mean, he's said in interviews that synchronicity is one of the factors that motivate and underpin his poetry. He was speaking sort of many decades ago, actually, about coincidences and correspondences in the book he wrote about Kerry Richards and Dylan Thomas, Keys to Transformation, and said of a book which I'll just mention in a moment, the Blue Butterfly, that Jung's theory of synchronicity offers the most accurate way, he says, in which he's come across in which to understand what happened to him. So maybe we'll hear a bit more about that. But anyway, Richard lives in Cambridge in the I Ching. He is primarily a poet. He's been a poet all his life, all his working life really. He's also lived in Italy, Greece, and the United States, and the former Yugoslavia. His poetry and poetics have been influenced by Jung for 60 years, especially vis-a-vis synchronicity and the imagination. His long poem, The Changing, which I have here, is based on the I Ching and is a homage to the I Ching. It's a really superb book. Every line of the I Ching gets a poem devoted to it. Really extraordinary work. He's published many other books which touch on synchronicity. I'll just mention two here. One is the book I was just mentioning, The Blue Butterfly, which I'm certainly hoping Richard will talk about today, which was based on an experience that he considers to have been deeply synchronistic. And it's a book-length poem about a sort of very dark theme, but also a very transformative and beautifully sort of explored theme. And he also wrote these sonnets called Notness, and a very clever anagram of sonnets, and which contain 10 poems, 10 sonnets, with the sort of subtitle, or in a subsection called On Synchronicity. So synchronicity has been even an explicit presence in his poetry. But he's written over 30 books, and received many poetry awards. His work's been translated into more than 100 languages. He also sort of has as you can see from the library behind him, he's an erudite man with sort of lots of academic connections as well, and has been for quite some time a Bi-Fellow at Downing College, Cambridge, an academic associate of Pembroke College, Cambridge, and a Fellow of the English Association. So, Richard's going to speak maybe for about an hour or an hour and 15 minutes or so about his work, and then we'll have a time for discussions, and so yeah. So I'll hand over to Richard at this point, and I look forward to whatever you're going to say. Actually, yeah.
Well, Roderick, thank you enormously for your introduction. I want to say thanks to several people here. Firstly, to Eleanor and everybody at PARI for the enormous amount of practical work that I know goes into these things. And in this case in particular, I think, because I had a lot of questions for Eleanor. Obviously to Jung, without whom none of this would ever have happened. We wouldn't know about synchronicity. And then to three people who have really influenced me more than anybody else in my thinking about synchronicity. Firstly, Roderick himself. I've tested out some of my ideas with him. So Roderick, great to see you, and thank you very, very much. And I hope this will actually be part of our ongoing dialogue. Secondly, Raymo Roth, whose books I have here, and I think if I get round to doing any theory, I shall be actually, I won't say taking any of his ideas further, but I will be applying his ideas. I think he's probably the most original and exciting of all the many, many thinkers about synchronicity that we've come across. And I also want to mention my wife, Melanie Reen, who is a practicing Jungian analyst, and her continuing gentle and at the same time powerful understanding of Jung in a very practical way has consistently influenced my feeling and thinking about Jung. Now, having said all this, I want to add a couple of other more words of introduction. That is that when we're thinking or feeling or having anything to do with synchronicity, I think, well, certainly what happens to me is a sense of increasing wonder and delight and awe, AWE, at the mystery of being. And I feel that this needs to be approached with two modes, really. One is modesty, that we can never understand the whole. We're just part of the whole as human beings. Nature is immense, and we're just a tiny, tiny part of this immense universe. So the modesty, and another thing is that a lot of emphasis has been made in the preceding webinars in this series about the authority of those who are speaking. Now, I want to, if I may, delicately dampen this a little bit or bring it down, because I'd like to emphasize that I don't feel or believe or think that synchronicity is the prerogative of academics or of Jungian analysts. And I think the academics and Jungian analysts here will probably agree with me, but there is just a sense in which we can all be far too daunted and inhibited by other people's authority. So I'd very much like to ask you not to do that. I'd like to ask, if we can, to try and cut through the formalities of this kind of occasion. And please do use the chat mode at the bottom of your screens, because that might actually help us democratize this a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to bring in my screen. And if I have some problems in doing this technically, I hope you'll forgive me. Now, can you see a screen there? No, you can't. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Right. Well, I'm going to start from the beginning and hope that that works. Right. Okay.
Perfect.
So I shall be zipping in and out of this. Sorry, I've got something going wrong here, I think. Control. Can you actually see some words at the bottom of your screen?
Yes, we can.
Do you not want them?
I want to try and get those out of the way. So
yeah,
that's it.
Yep.
Forgive me if there are a few odds and ends like this that interfere. So I call this 4 shillings and sixpence. because I'm interested in the quaternity or the tetrad and the six, the hexagram or the hexagon or the hexad. I've given another title to my talk, which is Time Chime. And I think that might be an interesting, much less daunting way of talking about synchronicity. Synchronicity itself as a term, I think, has some problems. So we're going to be zipping back and forwards a bit between screen and my own face. Now, here's a poem from the book Notness, which Roderick mentioned. You are not focused, not on anything when it arrives. It strikes you unawares. It can't be faked, and no conceit prepares its rendering, a subtle now surrendering. It has no antecedents. As for heirs, its will is here now, which redeems its shares as it alerts you in a listening, a corrugated wave-like glistening to your whole self and world, each coiled in each, infinite depth in infinite outreach. Your being, adrift in daydream or faint haze, blurry perturbation, misted haze, is opened, and a luminescent glaze arrays the world of this in praise. Time chime. Now, you're going to see, as well as printed slides, you're going to see some which have my handwriting. Not that my handwriting is of any interest in itself, but I do this because I'm going to overlay some slides using transparencies, which you'll see have a cumulative effect. I quite like the sort of tree image in the underlying paper here. That's a synchronistic or accidental thing. So time chime. So here you can see I'm suggesting in a picture a lot of connectivities between different times. And I'm just focusing for the moment on the two most basic definitions of synchronicity, or descriptions, or attempts at descriptions, or attempts at definitions that Jung gives in his major work, which first appeared in his essay with Wolfgang, in the book he wrote with Wolfgang Pauli called The Interpretation of Nature and the Psyche. Meaningful coincidence, an acausal connecting principle. I think particularly the second one is going to need some focus of analytical discussion, although I'm not sure that we're going to be getting to that in this particular session. I want, first of all, to focus on the experiential, that is the feeling, the physical element of synchronicity. When I say physical, I mean physical in the sense that synchronicity happens to us as physical beings. It happens in our bodies. Physis also in the ancient Greek sense, physis meaning nature, from the verb to flow, to emerge, and physics also in the modern sense of the subject that we study at school. Stop slides. So I'm putting that there to remind myself to stop occasionally and to come back and talk to you. Well, I'm going to carry on with the slides, actually. So I'm going to have to connect up again, share. I'm going to have to flick down a little bit. Can you see my screen there?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, we can see it.
Yes. Okay. Now I'm going to be talking about a very tragic event. That is part of my own experience of synchronicity. So I'll ask you to change tone, if you like, or change mood a little bit. Now, on the 21st of October 1941 in Serbia, a massacre occurred just outside the town of Kragujevac in central Serbia. And this was in a wooded area called Šumarice. Šuma is the Serbian word for woodland. Now, what happened? This was after the German invasion of former Yugoslavia, and the Germans were gradually developing their hold, the Nazis were developing their hold on the whole country, and various opposition groups got together, including both royalists, who were called Chetniks, and Tito's partisans. And in the town of Kragujevac, or near there, in 1941, the two groups came together despite their differences, and they ambushed a small platoon of about 30 Germans on a road in the hills near Kragujevac. And this was on the 16th of October. 29 or 30 of these soldiers were killed. So the Germans, in accordance with their policy of executing 100 people for every German killed, organized a massacre. And this happened in a couple of villages surrounding Kragujevac, and also in Kragujevac itself. Now, what they did was they mainly killed men and boys, and the boys were taken out from the local gymnasium, the grammar school. They were just taken out of their classes. So it was adults and children. There were some women killed. All the gypsies were killed, and all Jews were killed, because there were both Roma and Jews in the area. So this was one of the most horrific events. We can call it part of the Holocaust, although the Holocaust as it happened in former Yugoslavia is scarcely known by comparison with what happened in Poland and the other countries in Europe. Now I'm going to jump to what actually happened just before the massacre and during the massacre. So I must warn you that some of the photographs that you're about to be seeing are pretty horrendous. So here is the mass arrest. And you can see men are being marched off. They don't quite know it yet, but they're being marched off to be killed. And here their documents are being taken away. And you can see that this is outside the city. And these are obviously photos taken by the Germans. And this is the result of the massacre. And you can see there's a Nazi officer here just pointing. Now, I think most of us are used to seeing photographs of the Holocaust, horrific ones. This is, I think, pretty horrible. Now I'm going to move now to some of the messages that were left on postcards or scraps of paper, either to try and get messages to their families or discovered afterwards. And these are incredibly moving and painful. And if Vera Radojevic, are you there, Vera? Vera is not there, okay.
Yes, I am here, Richard.
Oh, hello, Vera. Well, thank you
Hello,
so
Vera.
much for coming in. Now, Vera is my translator, and she and I have been working together for many, many years, and she has translated my book, The Blue Butterfly. So here you have a message from Slavko Živkovic, a young man, and Vera is going to read them in, but I think first, Vera, I think I'll read them first in English and then you in
Okay.
Italian.
Okay.
The English doesn't get the intense, intimate, delicate quality of the Serbian. Now, even if you don't understand this, I'd like you just to hear it. So here's Slavko. He knows he's going to die. Whoever reads this, give it to my dear mother or such as Nadica. Goodbye, dear mum and brother and sisters. Goodbye, my beloved Nadica. Receive this from unlucky Shuta. Vera?
Ko bude ovo pročito, da damo joj dragoj majci ili Nadici Sočinoj. Zbogom, draga mama, i brate, i sestro. Zbogom, moja ljubljena Nadice. Pozdrav primite od nesretnog Šurca.
Okay, now we're going to have 5 of them. Here's one from a young man. He's obviously a gifted high school student. He's 20 years old and he knows what's going to happen, or perhaps he doesn't know, but anyway, he's concentrating on little things. Dad, me and Misha in the gun sheds, bring us lunch, a sweater for me and some rugs, bring us a jar of jam. Dad, go to the principal if it's worth it. Dad, send us something to eat. Mum, Uncle Petar is here too. Sent him 3 packets of tobacco on paper. There, over to you.
Tata, ja i Miša smo u Topovskim šumama. Donesi nam ručak, meni džemper i neki čilim. Donesi nam u teglici pekmeza, Paja. Tata, idi kod direktora, ako vredi. Tata, pošaljite nam nešto za jelo. Mama, ovdje je i ujak Petar. Pošaljite mu 3 pakla duvana i papira, Paja.
The next one of the most moving of all, is a boy aged 17, Ljubisha Jovanovic. Dear Daddy and Mummy, hi, for the last time.
Dragi tata, mama, pozdrav posljednji put, Ljubiša.
This one, Jacob Medina, as the name, the Old Testament name suggests, he's Jewish. Don't send bread tomorrow, Yakov.
Lebac sutra nemojte poslati, Jakov.
And this is perhaps one of the most famous ones. This man, Lazar Pantelic, was the headmaster of the local grammar school. And he's writing to his wife and children. I have to say, every time I read these, I find my voice cracks a little. I find them, although I've known these messages many years, it's difficult to read them. My heart and my little souls. Mira, kiss the children for me. Children, listen to Mum. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye forever. Love you all, Daddy, Lazar, and the date.
Srce moja i duše male, Miro, poljubi decu umjesto mene. Slušajte mamu, decu, i čuvajte se. S Bogom zauvijek. Ljubi sve, vaš tata Vaza.
Well, Vera, thank you very much. I hope you got a little bit of the quality of those. I'm going to move on. Here are buried pupils and professors, or pupils and teachers, on the 21st of October 1941. And this is a monument. This is part of the monument that's been erected. It's a huge memorial park now. And this is what is thought to have been said by this headmaster. And it's difficult to translate this with complete adequacy into English. Pucajte, ja I sada držim čas. Now this means shoot, I and now I'm giving my class. So this is the moment when I'm teaching my students as a teacher, when I'm dying with them. And the story is, in fact, that, well, perhaps it's not in fact, it may be apocryphal, but it's a good story. It's said that some of the collaborators, the Serbian collaborators with the Nazis, wanted to use their influence to enable the headmaster to get away, give somebody else to take his place. He said, no, I'm going to die with my students. And here you can see these little rocks that I'm pointing at here are the ones that have been quoted. And here there's a huge sculpture, a victory sign. So despite these sacrifices, we're going to win anyway. And of course, these huge monuments were put up in the park afterwards. It's a very beautiful place and an impressive place. Now, I've got a note to myself saying, stop slides. In fact, I'm going to carry on because, as you've seen, I'm having a bit of difficulty with the technicalities of switching on and off. So now a complete and utter jump of 44 years, 1941 to 1985. Now, in the spring of 1985, this was before I actually went to live in Yugoslavia, I was running some poetry workshops in Serbia with a friend of mine, Blanka Panic, who was director of a local school a language school in Belgrade. And I'd already given a poetry reading at her language center, and I'd already been to the international writers' meetings held every October by the Serbian Writers Association. Oh, incidentally, I'm just going to throw in an aside here that there are only two members of that association who live in Britain, and one of them is Vesna Goldsworthy, who I think is present. So hello, Vesna, and the other one is me. So anyway, I'm giving a poetry workshop in one of the local schools in Kragujevac with local teachers who are translating my words into Serbian, and the boys and girls are writing poems in Serbian. So this is very interesting in a way because it's, from the educational point of view, I'm running a translingual writing workshop, which I think is of interest in itself. And the boys and girls are writing poems from the suggestions and the input that I'm giving them. It's a beautiful day. It's a spring day. And I didn't realize at the time this was Tito's birthday. Tito was still alive at this time. No, sorry, that's wrong. He died a few years earlier, but his birthday was still being celebrated. And it was called the Day of Youth. Now, on this day, which was a national holiday, an enormous number of people were going along to see the museum. And I was there with my daughter, my first daughter, Lara, who was 17 years old. So this is still part of the story. And we line up outside the museum. There are people queuing to get into the Memorial Museum. So the next photograph is the key photograph, I think. Right. Now here, I'll go into this a little bit. You can see a little butterfly here sitting on my finger. You can see it's a snapshot. You can see there are other people lining up, and there are glass doors in front. And inside these glass doors, although you can't see it in the photograph, are some words in German. Machen Sie mir dieses Land Deutsch. Make this land German for me, signed by Adolf Hitler. Now, just before this photograph, we'd taken two others. I suddenly looked down at my finger and saw this little blue butterfly sitting there. So I said to my daughter, Lara, quick, take a photograph. And she looked at me in the sort of way that, teenage daughters will look at their father with sort of slightly askew. What's he going on about? What are you going on about, Dad? And I showed her the butterfly. She had the camera. She took a photograph. And then the little butterfly flew up a little bit and then came and sat on my finger again. So I stretched my hand out, as you can see me doing now, if you've got my image on the screen as well. And the butterfly came and sat back on my finger. So I said, come on, Laura, give me the camera. I managed to sort of focus it, and that's the result. And here's a close-up. I much later established that the species of butterflies called the Reverdim blue. Now, pretty well as soon as this happened, I had an emotional experience, a strong emotional experience, a physical experience. And immediately my thinking went to my knowledge of the ancient Greek word for butterfly, which is psyche, the soul. Now, if you're not familiar with this, forgive me if you are, it's quite easy to see how to reconstruct how the ancient Greeks might have identified the soul with the butterfly, or rather thought of the butterfly as an emblem for the soul or whatever, but correlated the two in some way. And that is because of the life cycle of the butterfly and all the different stages that it goes through. So I hadn't thought of this at the time of synchronicity. This is 1985. I wasn't thinking about Jung at all at this time. And it was only much, much later, after my meeting with Roderick, and here, Roderick, you come in, after we've met at the launch of the Red Book, as Roderick has mentioned, which Melanie, my wife, took me to because she was a Jungian analyst and she was invited. And I should say, I'm not an analyst, I'm not an academic, I'm a poet. So I was lucky to be there. But anyway, after that event, I wrote to Roderick and said, do you think this could actually be a synchronicity? And Roderick wrote back and said, well, yes, I think it could be. So from that moment on, I thought of it as a synchronicity. But of course, what occurred to me immediately was that the times were not synchronic. They were not actually simultaneous. There was a huge gap of 44 years. So if we're to include this in the category of synchronicities, we have some stretching of Jung's term and some testing of Jung's term to think about. Okay, so the next thing that happens, I'm still telling a story, and I hope my reason for doing this is I want you to, as far as you possibly can, to imagine your way into it, to feel it. Synchronicity is a physical experience, it's a feeling experience. It can happen to anybody. You don't need to be anybody special for a synchronistic experience to happen to. Anyway, so the poetry reading tour went on in Serbia a little bit, and then I came home to Cambridge. Now, pretty well as soon as I got home to Cambridge, I found myself with a bit more time to think about things and to reflect on the whole of my visit to Serbia, which had been for about 10 days or so. I began to get an idea for a poem. Now, I can't really say whether the idea had come to me when I was actually experiencing the butterfly on my finger, or how quickly the poem formed, but it came pretty quickly, and it was almost a dictation in itself. So here's the first one, and this became the title, eventually the title of a book called The Blue Butterfly, which Roderick has shown you a copy of. And you can see from the first line that my own Jewish identity comes in here. And I think I want to add first that, before I read the poem, that for a long time I'd been thinking about how I, as a Jew born in London in 1943, that is just after the end of the Blitz, how I could write a poem about the Holocaust. I wasn't there. And we have so many witness testimonies to the Holocaust itself from great writers such as Primo Levi, for example, that it seemed an audacity, or if you like, a huge impertinence for somebody like me to write about the Holocaust. So I suddenly realized that the experience that was happening to Serbs, mainly Serbs, not Jews, Serbs, had somehow triggered me. So here's the poem. On my Jews' hands, born out of ghettos and shtetls, raised from unmarked graves of my obliterated people in Germany, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Russia. On my hands, mothered by a refugee's daughter, first opened in blitzed London, grown big through post-war years, safe in suburban England. On my pink, educated, ironical left hand of a parvenu, not quite British, pseudo-gentleman, which first learned to scrawl its untutored messages among Latin-reading, rugby-playing militarists in an elite boarding school on Sussex's Green Downs and against the cloister walls of Puritan Cambridge. On my hands, weakened by anomie. On my writing hands, now of a sudden, willingly stretched before me in Serbian spring sunlight, on my unique living hand, trembling and troubled by this May visitation, like a virginal leaf new sprung on the oldest oak in Europe, on my proud, firm hand, miraculously blessed by the 2,800 martyred men, women, and children fallen at Kragujevac. A blue butterfly simply fell out of the sky and settled on the forefinger of my international bloody human hand. I'm going to say make 2 points about this. The human hand, I think, is terribly important. And I don't quite know why or how. I've written another book called Manual, which is poems about the human hand. And the word hand comes in many times in the poem. Secondly, there's a movement from the first line, Jew, which is a specific group of people, which, like any specific group of people, is exclusive for one reason or another, to the final word, international, final line, which is inclusive. Now let me go see where we go from here. Another click on the. Oh yes, so this is the second poem. This came out pretty well immediately after the first poem, and it was almost as though, you know, many poets will talk about this, that you don't quite know what's happening when you're writing a poem. You don't quite know where it's going to go. There's a voice inside you which is not simply your conscious mind. The ancient Greeks called this the muses. One of the muses, the daughters of memory, there were 9 of them. So this is a play on the word nada. Nada, as most of us know in Spanish, means nothing, but in Serbian or Croatian, the word means hope, the equivalent of nadezhda in Russian. So here's the second poem. Like a wind-blown seed, not yet rooted or petal from an impossible moonflower, shimmering, unplucked, perfect in a clear night sky, like a rainbow without rain, like the invisible hand of a god stretching out of nowhere to shower joy brimful from plenty's horn, like a greeting from a child unborn, unconceived, like an angel bearing a gift, a ring, a promise, like a visitation from a twice redeemed soul, like a silent song sung by the ghost of nobody to an unknown sweet and melodious instrument buried ages in the deepest cave of being, like a word only half heard, half remembered, not yet fully learned, from a stranger's language the sad heart longs for to unlock its deepest cells. A blue butterfly takes my hand and writes in invisible ink across its page of air. Nada, elpida, nadezhda, esperanza, Hoffnung. There's the poem. And the last word, the last line is hope. Now, this is again a signal to myself to stop slides, but I'm going to carry on. And what I'm going to do now is, without talking, I'm going to take you through a mapping of these events. I'm going to give you a few seconds to look at each slide. And then I'm going to retrace the mapping, the procedure by which the mapping came to me, that is accumulated. And I'm going to talk about it a bit. But I'd like you to have the experience of this first, without overlay, without analysis. So here we go. Okay, now, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to go back. I apologize for the slow mechanics of this. Now, I had read Ramo Roth's work before I started making these diagrams. And you can see that here is, if you like, the fact of what happened during the Second World War. And here is what happens to me in 1985. Now, you put them all together, and you have what most people think of as the Star of David, and a specifically Jewish symbol. And of course, that is resonant for me as a Jew, just in the same sort of way that the cross was resonant to Jung with his Christian background. And you can see here my attempt. I'm not an artist, incidentally, but I'm simply trying to show visually how there is an expanding, rippling effect from this experience. And here I'm suggesting there's a sort of twirling effect. And I'm going to come out of this in for a second, actually, in a minute. Here I'm embedding fractals into these, the symbol. If you hear a little cat in the background, it's my cat, or Melanie's cat and my cat, meowing. And perhaps his coming at this moment is a synchronicity. He's very good at picking these things up. And here fractals going outwards. And here is not simply the star, but the hexagonal shape. And that's important, as you'll see in a minute. And again, here I'm using the word time chime rather than synchronicity. And this occurred to me, this term only occurred to me in the course of my making this, preparing this, this webinar. And this is something I said in response to one of the previous speakers in this fine series organized by Roderick. The synchronistic experience does go on rippling through one's life. Rippling in time, rippling in space. Now, just to continue that commentary a little bit, if we look in the natural world, we see particularly fractal shapes repeating themselves. So a daffodil is a kind of six-pointed star. And these are very beautiful. I think in terms also of Wordsworth's terrific lyrical poem, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. A host of golden daffodils. So you can see the multiplication of these forms in nature. Snow crystals, water crystals. And my cat is coming up to say hello at this moment. So he likes standing on the table. And you see the hexagonal shapes on the tortoise's shell. Interestingly, the I Ching, the first notations in ancient China leading to the I Ching were made on tortoise shell. Here you have the hexagons in the beehive. You can see that the hexagon is an incredibly packed, economically packed form. You can see the hexagons again here in the pineapple, in the kiwi. And here is the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland with these magnificently huge rock formations. Now, the I Ching, which I've written a book of poems dedicated to this great masterpiece, consists of 64 hexagrams, and the hexagram consists of 6 broken or solid lines. And here is a model of the Tai Chi Tu, or known to most of us as the yin-yang sign. And you can see that the Chinese scholars or commentators, interpreters, thinkers have used a hexagrammatic form to comment on this. So we're looking at geometries of beauty. I thought I'd throw some of these in well, we could think of this as a quaternity of the four wings, but if we include the head and the tail, then we can see the butterfly as a sort of hexagon. This is the female. The female is more delicately colored. This is the male in more intense blue. Now I'm going to jump from there to something that some of you may think impudent or cheeky. I'm inviting you to look at the scarab incident, Jung's famous scarab incident with his analysand in the same sort of way. Here you can see the flying scarab, and again you can see a hexagon shape. And these are very beautiful creatures. So I'm basing these diagrams on the account given by Jung, which has become an almost paradigmatic example of synchronicity. And here I'm focusing on the opening experience, which is, of course, not simultaneous to the actual synchronistic experience. And then we have the telling of the scarab in the dream. So this is during the analytical session. And you have the dreamer as the analysand and the patient, and you have the analyst. Incidentally, I think it's quite frequent that there are at least two people involved in a synchronistic experience. In my case, it was me and the dead and me, but here it's very specifically the analyst and the analysand. Now, these three, number two and number three, come very close together, but number one, the dreamer is presumed, the analysand was presumably at home when she had the dream, and there was a time lapse before she brought her dream to Jung. And then again, if you accept this pattern, you have a merging of two triangles in the form of the Seal of Solomon or the Star of David. And I'm putting in more overlays here. Jung opens the window. The window is opened. And I'm trying to look at this from the point of view of the experiencer, although we only have Jung's accounts, which we obviously rely on. But there is a heuristic experience. There is a moment of discovery here for the analysand. Jung describes this as her block disappearing, and the analysis proceeds as he would have hoped it would. But I wonder also if this is also a heuristic experience for Jung too. I think it was. By heuristic, I mean a moment of discovery. And you see, I have other. So here again is are more images of the scarab. The scarab is also is the dung beetle. Here it is rolling a ball of dung. So the scarab is not just beautiful, it's very much concerned with the physical world is concerned with shit. So perhaps this is a message to come back to the body as well as be in the head. And here we have the ancient Egyptian symbols of the scarab, which was a symbol of transformation for them and was synonymous with or emblematized the sun god Ra arising every morning. So it's a symbol of renewal. Okay, now I'm going to read another sonnet. To note disparities, things that don't fit, and then discover that in fact they do, reveals reality as composite, as pattern, which a common thread runs through. Event and mind, blurred, latent, localize, inner and outer gather, graze, connect. Apparent counter movements focalize, and suddenly the human intellect is born on such a flood of energies that though you'll always fail to fathom how, what once seemed unimaginable is actualized in an inclusive now. Delight inflects the heart. Welling surprise opens your pores, streams through your hands and eyes. Now I'm coming back to time chime, and I'm linking the star here with the unus mundus, the one world where duality disappears, a hieros gamos, the sacred marriage. Incidentally, I've already used one four-letter word, so let me use another one here. The verb gamiso in Greek means to fuck. So it's not just a word suggesting something mystical. It's a very physical word in modern Greek. Time chime. And a bit more overlay here. Now, I've gone on for an hour. I'm going to go on for a little longer. I've already suggested that the term synchronicity may itself need challenging. And I want to have a look at a couple of definitions here. Or rather, actually, first we're going to go to something connected with poetry. Now, here I'm looking at the objective correlative, which is a theory of poetry or connected with poetry, which T.S. Eliot developed in his essay on Hamlet in 1921. And the idea is that you've got your inner eye, and that connects in some way with something outside. And you could say that the something outside inspires the inner eye. So there is a connection. The it becomes a thou, an other. So that, oh dear, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Well, I'm just going to go back. So the it becomes a thou, and I think here of Martin Buber. There's a personal relationship between the I and whatever is outside. And then a kind of merging, or let's say an approach, and then a merging where the inner eye and the outer eye combine. Now, this is when, for Eliot, at the moment, the work of art happens. So you could apply this, say, to Wordsworth's daffodils. Wordsworth sees the daffodils, his sister Dorothy sees the daffodils. Dorothy writes about it in her diary, and eventually Wordsworth writes the poem. And I'm suggesting that this connectivity between the I and the thou develops into the merging of the Taijitu, the yin yang, when each are in each is in each, the inner and the outer, the yin and the yang, whichever way you want to put it. Then correspondences. Well, in all the finest poetry and in mythical thinking, you will find that there are correspondences, you could say, between macro and microcosm. So a simple example here would be the storm in King Lear, Shakespeare's greatest tragedy, where everything comes together. The elements, there's a huge physical storm going on the heath. The gods are angry, obviously. The country has fallen apart, thanks to Lear's folly and ineptitude, and as he's getting older. And King Lear is raving mad on the wild heath. I seem to have smeared those with lines, never mind. And his fool is professionally mad, and there's Edgar pretending to be mad. So you've got the chiming of different layers of reality, if you like. They're all coming together. And then another element from literature. In his Poetics, Aristotle has two main conceptions for the denouement of the play. This is the moment of realization, let's say when Oedipus realizes that he has actually married his mother, killed his father. You have the anagnorisis, the recognition and the discovery, and the denouement. But this is, along with this, as part, these two are part of each other. You have the peripetia, the reversal, the turning point. The two happen together. And I think all of these notions can be applied to synchronicity. Now, I'm just going to finish with three quotations. I've got much more to say, but we're not going to have time. So here is Jung in the essay that we've been talking about, Synchronicity and a Causal Connecting Principle. This is not such an audacious conclusion if we define number psychologically as an archetype of order which has become conscious. Remarkably enough, the psychic images of wholeness which were spontaneously produced by the unconscious, the symbols of the self in mandala form, also have a mathematical structure. They are, as a rule, quaternities or their multiples. These structures not only express order, they also create it. And then Marie-Louise von France, whose book Number and Time is absolutely essential reading for anybody who wants to really get into to look at synchronicity in depth. Jung devoted practically all of his life's work to demonstrating the vast psychological significance of the number 4. Now, what I've suggested following Ramo Roth is that the quaternity is not the be-all and end-all. There are other forms which need to be considered, which happen widely in nature. And I've focused on the hexad, not the tetrad, the 6. I'm not going to have time to show you the thinking patterns that Ramo Roth explores in huge depth and which I've tried to replicate in considering how the tetrad can be worked into the hexad. And interestingly, Roderick comes in with what I think is an absolutely brilliant modification, or perhaps that's not quite the right word, because we need to be modest here. After all, with Jung, we're dealing with a man who was an enormous pioneer in many realms, but also a synthesizer. But Roderick, let's see what he says, talking about synchronicity. Two or more events parallel one another through having identical, similar, or comparable content. There's no discernible or plausible way in which this paralleling could be the result of normal causes. The paralleling must be sufficiently unlikely and detailed as to be notable. The experience must be meaningful beyond being notable. Now, there's several points that I think are absolutely fascinating here. Roderick has taken out the idea of simultaneity. And by so doing, it seems to me that he has brought synchronicity back to be considered along with déjà vu, premonition, possibly prophecy, and perhaps psychokinesis, as in the well-known Pauli condition, things start moving or breaking. I haven't got time to look at this notion of normal causes, but I think that would be worth doing, perhaps in another seminar where we go back to Aristotle and his notion of final cause, which the rational scientists, post-Cartesian scientists, have pretty well taken out of the equation teleological cause. And then here we have Remo Roth, whose work really extends Jung very considerably. The field of this research should be an expanded view of synchronicity, which on the basis of symbolically amplified physical concepts would include telepathy, precognition, and psychokinesis. That's just what I've said that is implied in Roderick's formulation. The hypothesis of a unified psychophysical reality should be 1, the background for the explanation of these phenomena, as well as 2, a new scientific interpretation of the energy principle as a fluid or watery yin-yang bipolarity, as in Taoism and Hermetic alchemy. Now, I'm going to stop there, except for one thing. So I'm coming back to myself. Hello again. So supposing we think of synchronicity, or as I prefer to call it, time chime, as, shall we say, two nexuses, two bundles, and they're sort of, as it were, floating around. This is a very crude little model. So here we have, let's say, the dreamer's dream of the scarab, and here we have the analytical session and the scarab flying in. And suddenly, I'm using a chopstick here. They're both whirling about, and suddenly, somehow, they sort of combine. And there we have a coming together. And the chopstick would perhaps represent the unifying principle, the unus mundus, the hieros gamos. I'm going to stop there. I've got quite a lot more I could say, and I must apologize for the technical hitches, but I hope that what I've said is coherent enough. And so, Roderick, back to you.
Well, thank you, thank you, Richard, so much for that. I mean, you were talking about time a lot, and I have to say, you created a sense of timelessness in your presentation, in the sense that I feel I just started listening to you and was taken into your presentation and emerged out of the other side of it, and find that, you know, quite a bit of time has passed. It's like sort of coming out of a fairy hill or something. But anyway, and you covered so much ground and also so many sort of dimensions of sort of, well, both feeling and intellection and, you know, visual imagery and so on. So it was a very kind of to me a very notably holistic and impactful presentation because of that. And yeah, so you know, thank you so much. Really interesting. I mean, I'm going to just say to people if about questions. I mean, if you can do the usual thing of raising, if you've got a question or a comment, if you can use the reaction button and do the raised hand, and then I'll call on you, and Michael will spotlight you when you speak. But if given sort of time and so on, if you could keep the questions kind of quite focused and to the point, then we can get through as many as possible. So thank you in advance for that. And I suppose, you know, I'd like to ask if there's a little more you could say, Richard, about your the sort of the relationship between poetry and synchronicity as you see it, and because I know you've written about when you in relation to your book on changing, the poems written about the I Ching, and there's a superb sort of postscript to that where you talk a little bit about some of the sort of relationship between Chinese thinking, the kind of correlative thinking, and poetic as a sort of foundation for poetic thinking and metaphorical thinking and different kinds of connective principles that there are. And you also include amongst those, quite notably, Jung's notion of synchronicity. And that statement seems to me to suggest that in some way you're seeing the synchronicity, this sort of time chimes. Perhaps I should change my vocabulary. As a way of as well as a sort of something that is quite fundamental to the poetic sensibility, if you like. And I just wonder whether that's in your when you're writing poetry, when you're sort of entering into the frame of mind where you feel poems are going to happen or are going to arrive, if you feel there are sort of, you know, there is a quality of synchronicity to it, or there is an analogy between that state and the experiencing of synchronicities, or what sort of connections you might make, you know, and how closely related do you think these ideas are to your poetic practice, you know? I mean, anyway, that's a sort of a question.
Absolutely fascinating, Roderick. Part of our ongoing discussions and thinking. Well, I have actually written an essay on the blue butterfly experience, which is in a book called Balkan Spaces, and you may be able to find it online. I think it's called A Synchronistic Experience in Serbia. Now that says a little bit about it, but unpicking these experiences is very difficult, and we do need to pay attention, I think, to words. So I'm a little bit reticent here. What sort of state does one write a poem in? First of all, I think there's a kind of openness where the the rational mind is almost, as it were, switched off, or if not entirely switched off, gives way to something else. Now, I find I quite often have these times late at night before going to bed. So quite often I'll have a notebook by my bed, you know, just in case I think of something or an idea pops in. I often find it happens when I'm moving, so walking, having lots of images, you know, things I'm seeing passing by. I've done a couple of Taoist workshops, and one of the meditations that was given to us was a walking meditation. So you walk with your hands folded, as though you're meditating in the lotus position, and you just sort of allow stuff to come in, you know, trees, birds, nightingales, daffodils, the old woman on the street corner, the yellow chair, a star. I'm thinking of Van Gogh here. So things come in from the outside, and they chime with an inner, with whatever's inside you. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be something from memory or from a previous time. It can be in that moment. So I'll see if I can give you a little example. I was driving to my acupuncture appointment, and I think my acupuncturist, who's a very good friend, Chidong Wu, may actually be here. But I quite often get ideas when I'm driving to see him. And when I'm driving, I'm musing. That's an interesting word, musing. And suddenly I had this image of I'm just trying to remember it, spangled shadows. I don't quite know where that came in. Spangled, perhaps it wasn't spangled. I think it was something else. It may have been. That's it, dappled shadows. And then I thought of the ways. This must have been triggered by some effects of light. The word came up, and then I thought, of course, of Gerard Manley Hopkins. Glory be to God for dappled things. And then I started thinking of Hopkins' inscape and instress, which very much are about the absolute uniqueness of the this, the thisness of the this, the thisness of the phenomenon. And I wrote down spangle something. I'm still trying to pick it up. I made a note of it somewhere. Dappled shadows on the horizon or something like that. Now, there's a little complex image, but it comes to me from the outside. I'm going to shut up for a minute because I think there's some people who have got some more questions. So does that help?
Yes, that's very helpful. Yes, thank you.
In other words, inner and outer, I and thou.
Yeah.
Of course, for Martin Buber, the I and the thou are the ways in which the human experience is not just the it, the itness of the it, but through the thisness of the this, the haikeitas in Duns Scotus, is a way of experiencing the divine. You're face to face with the other. And the otherness of the other enters you, and you enter the otherness of the other. So you come out with what Arthur Rimbaud calls, at the age of 16, writing to his teacher in 1850s, when he was about 17, a provincial schoolboy, he wrote this line, Je est un autre. I is another. I is somebody else.
Mm.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you
Okay.
have the key to all poetry is correlative thinking, analogical thinking, not limited to logical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It's analogical thinking, likenesses, similarities, dissimilarities. And if you look at the so I'm going to go on a little bit more about it. If you look at the etiology of scientific notions, my bet is that you will always find, that there is that kind of poetic leap,
Mm-hmm.
that heuristic moment. Archimedes in his bath,
Mm-hmm.
works out that his body in the bath displaces the same volume of water, and he runs down the street naked in Athens saying, Eureka! Well, what does Eureka mean? It means I found it. Eureka in modern Greek.
Mm-hmm.
I've got it. I've found it. There's your haiku moment. There's your moments of discovery. It's the thisness of the this, the nowness of the now, the here-ness of the here, this, here, now.
Mm. Thank you, Rich. That's very, very helpful and very interesting. We'll move on to some questions.
We all have this capacity.
Yeah.
We all do it.
Yes. Yeah.
So metaphorical thinking, analogical thinking happens all the time.
Mm.
And we tend to lose this in English because we think of the Anglo-Saxon words as the physical words. These are the words that come over well in poetry. I mean, think of someone like Ted Hughes. He's full of Anglo-Saxonisms,
Mm.
and there's a sort of guttural, fleshy, bodily quality to his work as a paradigm.
Mm.
The words that we have from Latin and Greek tend to be abstract in register. So that's one of the problems. We've lost the physicality of those words, like hieros, gamos was my example.
Yeah.
We've lost the physicality of the Latin and Greek. But if you speak Greek, you've got that tradition inside you. If you speak German, you can make huge composite words, beautiful composite words out of physical things. One that I learned, I don't know German, but I know a few words. Sonnenuntergang, Traurigkeit. That's a single word.
Mm-hmm.
Son, the sun, unter, under, gang, going, traurig, melancholy or sorrow, kite, the abstraction. So in one word, you've got all these physical images, wonderful physical images inside the abstraction. And it basically means sunset sadness, sunset melancholy. Well, we get the meaning in English, but in German, Sonnenuntergang, Traurigkeit. Wow. You've got the physicality of all of those combined images in the abstraction.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. That's great. So we've got some questions lined up. So Charles, if you want to unmute yourself, and Michael will spotlight you.
Hello, Charles.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Lovely, lovely. I just wondered, do you have a really notable synchronistic experience prior to the blue butterfly experience? Or was this also an introductory slammer of an experience for you with the blue butterfly?
Very good question. Thank you. Nothing so powerful. Absolutely nothing. It was very powerful. And as a result, I went to live in Yugoslavia. And I wouldn't have done that if that hadn't happened. And it's somehow things sort of fell into place after that. You know, Branka Panic, who I mentioned, said that she wanted a lector at her language center. And I had recently broken up a relationship, and I'd sort of come through a kind of midlife crisis. So I was coming out of it again, and Thatcher was in power. I didn't want to be in Thatcher's England, you know, any more than a lot of Americans want to be in Trump's America, or any of us wanted to be in Johnson's Britain. But anyway, it was time to go somewhere, and this came up, and I got a job in Yugoslavia, and I knew by then that the two little poems I read you were going to become a book. And I didn't quite know how. So part of my trying to understand the blue butterfly was to go and live in Yugoslavia. Now, at that time, you know, people in the poetic community, I remember some friends of mine saying, what do you want to go and live in Yugoslavia for? Things are happening here. Now, people who imagine themselves to be at the center of things usually aren't. It's the peripheries where exciting things happen, not in the centers. And people in the so-called dominant cultures, Britain, you know, USA, France, and so on, think that we think we're the most important. We really do, but we're not. So anyway, I followed a pattern unfolded, let's say, from that experience. Now, very interesting. There's a book in the pipeline which Roderick is editing and co-editing with Anna Radovic, who I think is also here. Hello, Anna, if you are.
Hello.
Which is a monograph on the blue butterfly by John Peck. Now, John Peck is an American poet and also the co-translator of Jung's Red Book. He's a well-known, he covers both of these grounds, and he's also a Jungian analyst. And in his monograph, he describes the blue butterfly experience as initiatory. And I think that is what it was for me.
Right.
So a great question. Thank you. Have you got
the arrival of
the
arrival of the soul? The arrival of the soul. When did?
Yes. I was talking about this before with Melanie, and she made just before coming online, and I said it's extraordinary how a synchronistic experience will have ripples and will lead to other associations and connections. And she said, yes, but and here's the Jungian coming in, but it's also the making conscious of those connections. So the soul, I would say, had always been there.
Yeah.
But the soul was articulated or re-articulated, or if you, I'm going to bring in another, you know, I think it's good to think in different frames of experience. Implicate.
It certainly caught your attention, didn't it?
You could say that again. But let's put it this
just
way.
one last question.
Sorry, I haven't quite finished.
Okay.
I just want to follow this association. Forgive me.
Yeah.
But hold your question. Implicate and explicate, and the whole notion of emergence, which so often occurs in discussion about synchronicity. Now, if we apply this, if we apply David Bohm's theory, and we remember, incidentally, that PARI was founded by David Peat, with Bohm and Jung. I think initially David Bohm as his the sort of prime inspirer, there is a connection, or there are multiple connections everywhere and at all times, I think, and all places, between the implicate order and the explicate order. So the soul emerges in the blue butterfly, we could say, in the explicate order. I wonder,
Right.
I'm just thinking aloud here, could we also sort of link this? I'm not a Platonist, but you know, Plato's idea of perfect forms existing in a sort of somewhere or other, the ways in which these surface or are realized or are articulated in the physical universe means they are multiplied and replicated. So your form of the six will be replicated countless times in the in the formations, the natural formations that I was indicating. You've got one more question. Let's.
Oh yes, and it's a very expansive question. But when did you first start writing poetry?
Oh, that I started writing poetry at primary school. Hang on. No, when I went to grammar school, age 11 or 12, there was a Mr. Richards at Hendon County Grammar School,
Yeah.
and he got us to write a poem. And I loved it. I'd scribbled a bit before then, but then the most important thing was going to see the Diary of Anne Frank. It was a play that was put on in 1956, and I was 13. So as a Jewish boy, I just had my bar mitzvah, and my mother took me to see this play. And in the autumn, I'd got a scholarship to Mill Hill School, a public school. In other words, a private school.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
fee-paying school. And one of the conditions of my getting this scholarship was that I had to attend chapel every day. So the headmaster interviewed my mother and said, you know, he will have to attend chapel. You realize that, of course. And there's no anti-Semitism here, of course.
Right.
In fact, I think it was sort of asemitic rather than anti-Semitic. And I attended chapel every day. But at the same, then, having read the Diary of Anne Frank, had been terribly moved by it, and I'm feeling that Anne Frank was a sort of sister to me, I found myself writing a diary. And that's when I began writing. So it was to do with transitions, liminal experiences, suddenly becoming a teenager, going from a very happy co-ed school where I was just getting interested in girls to a pretty tough public school with fagging system and all the rest of it. And there I was writing poems at this liminal moment. So we have more.
Maybe a bit of synchronicity there.
I don't know. I never thought about that, but yes, maybe. But well, chiming of lots of elements, if not synchronicities. Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks very much,
Thanks.
Charles. And
Thank you.
so we've got a couple more questions here. So Evie, can you come in, because you were next, and then you sort of dropped out, but you came back. So maybe Okay. Thank you. So if you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Well, I'm interested, and deeply interested in if in the I Ching. I too have worked with for decades. Always it furthers one to cross the great water. And I'm thinking that crossing the great water may be this alchemical marriage that we've discussed, or is it more like the poetic leap? The muses, the work.
Well, I can't comment. I don't know. all I will say is that any image is multivalent, is polysemic,
Right.
has many meanings.
And they're personal.
And when we make these connections, they're deep and they're personal. If it's meaningful to you, then it's meaningful. I don't see why that could not be true, but it's not the whole truth.
Well, you mentioned the leap and the poetic leap. And I'm also an educator and a musician and love the muses and need the muses. Sometimes pray for the muses. And I'm wondering if there's a connection between that and that statement in the I Ching. It furthers one to cross the great water.
I think there could well be, but I don't know you. And what you say is a personal statement seems really interesting.
Well, I meet you, and I certainly feel as though I do, because your poetry is generous in revealing who you are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to say something here that I think we all have these capacities.
I do too.
And these capacities for making connections. So thank you very much. I don't think I've answered you very satisfactorily because I've thrown it back to you.
In our
But Jung talks about meaningful coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I understand it, the opposite from meaningful is meaningless. It doesn't mean there's just one meaning. So I'm moving on to, I'm diverging a little bit from what you're saying, but it seems to me that there are, if you like, different kinds of experiences of synchronicity. And I believe that Roderick has explored these very, very well in his books, if I remember correctly. But there's a sort of coincidence where you notice
Mm-hmm.
two things coming together, and they're not very significant for you, and they don't touch you very deeply. And then there's another layer where they interest you quite a lot, and they interest you intellectually, and you think, oh, well, that's really interesting. I must pursue that sometime, you know. And then there's another layer where you find it very deeply moving.
Uh-huh.
Your life changes. And of course, all of these things may happen at once. So I was very attentive to Roderick's talk last week, where he was talking about, very modestly and very elegantly and correctly, about Matthew
Mather.
Matthew Mather, that's it. Matthew Mather applying to him for a PhD thesis. Now, the synchronicity there, in that case, actually was synchronicity in the pure Jungian sense, because the phone call from Robert Aziz came through while Matthew was in the room. So there was the chime, right? It was simultaneous. But think of it from Matthew's point of view. Well, I know Matthew. I did a workshop for him in Tipperary, and I met him through Roderick. But that was absolutely life-changing for him. He went ahead and he did his PhD, and he wrote it on Mercurius, the trickster. So these things, I mean, all this is in an intellectual context, But it's not just intellectual, it's deeply moving and touching. And we don't have to be intellectuals to have synchronistic experiences.
Right.
And the I Ching is based, Jung's work on the I Ching, which had been going on for many years through Richard Wilhelm, gradually led him to the synchronicity. So if you ask about correspondences, correspondent thinking, you have this very, very curious phenomenon in ancient China, where somehow these people put together a set of mathematically elegant and beautiful symbols based on binary mathematics, binary and tertiary mathematics. And so you have a connection between little signs, lines, split lines and straight lines, and that's connected with the king asking questions about should he invade another country? And when it gets personalized, you know, does she love me? Or should I break off this affair? Or will she come back to me? Or is my job going to be safe next year? You know, so somehow there's this connectivity between this and that, I and other, blah, blah, blah. I'll stop.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And
Thank
I'll-
you very much. So we'll move on to the next question, which is Raymond. We've got two more questions actually, two more, and so if they can keep them both reasonably concise, Raymond, and then we'll get on to the final one, and maybe we'll just have a little bit of time to wrap up as well. So thanks very much. So Raymond, over to you.
Richard, thank you so much for a moving and what was for me revelatory talk.
Sorry, I'm a bit deaf, Raymond. Could you speak up a bit?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk, which was moving and revelatory for me. I just want to go back to a moment in your poem, The Blue Butterfly, which was the most meaningful to me. And that was the moment when you spoke about the butterfly was on your hand and then it flew off, but then it came back. And to me, just for me, that was very moving. I do nature photography and I take pictures of butterflies. And I learned after many times of trying to chase them around the yard that if you find a butterfly on a bush and you try to take their picture and they fly off, stay exactly where you are. And most times the butterfly will come back exactly to that bush that it was feeding on. And so that's just a piece of natural history. And they do that as a protective measure to keep themselves safe. And what came together with me in your poem was that moment when the butterfly came back. And what really got to me was the fact that the Serbians who were being executed could not protect themselves, were not able to fly off and escape. And as evidenced in the postcards that they were sending to their family, they couldn't protect themselves from the Germans. Yet the butterfly, as a symbol for psyche, seems to me to suggest that even though the body has been executed, that the soul or spirit or consciousness or whatever can persist. So that's the experience I had with that. The other comment I wanted to make is that the difference between the 4 and the 6 was something in my own poetry and writing I've been working on. And I think that in Parry Center, it seems to me that I've been getting the idea that consciousness precedes materiality and the universe is an emergent property of consciousness. So if the universe is spatial, that's made up of 3 axes, triaxial. The quaternity is useful if you're having a map on 2 surfaces. There are 4 directions, north, south, east, west, but the universe is triaxial. And if that's so, there would be 6 points in order to create space. So
Well, I'm going to come in there. I think everything that you say is absolutely fascinating. Thank you very, very much indeed. There is one more speaker.
Yeah.
I want to say this, that all patterns that we make are play. So I don't think there is one necessarily dominant pattern. Even in the mandala, you know, even in symbols of perfection. So if you start looking at fractals, you see there are various numbers that will produce fractals in the world. So I think we should perhaps start with fractals, not just the 4, not just the 6, the 5, certainly, absolutely the 5, and others, and multiples of these numbers. Because there's an immense number of models of symmetry in the world. But I also think we need to take into account the asymmetrical. But it's a huge discussion that you've broached. So why don't you write to me, Raymond? And, you know, it'd be a pleasure, and anybody else who'd like to do that, you can find my my email address. It'd be a privilege to talk to any of you. Have we got time for Max? Or
I think if you've got time, Richard, maybe
I've
Max,
got time, yes.
Yeah, I think Max, can you
let's make this the last one.
last question, and if you could try and keep the question itself short of this. Yeah.
I'll be very quick. Thank you for all this. I just echo all the you know, wonderful things people have said about this. So I'm interested in rhyme. Your first poem ended with a series of rhyming words. Another one had a...
Could you say that again, please?
I'm interested in rhyme. Your first poem ended with a series of rhyming words.
Yes.
And then another one ended with not quite a metric couplet, but a rhyming couplet. And I'm interested in your thoughts about rhyme in relation to use your word, time shine.
Well, rhyme, I think, is one of the... Rhyme, I know from experience, is one of the techniques of poetry. It's not the only one. There are many others. There are some poets today who said that rhyme is no longer applicable in the world in which we live, especially in America, despite models, you know, wonderful models like Robert Frost. So I'm not a modernist, I'm not a postmodernist. I think the term postmodern, as I've already indicated in response to another speaker, I did it delicately then, but let me say it more clearly now. I think that postmodernism is a stupid term, really stupid, because modern means up to date, of the present. So how can you be postmodern? It's a tag, but it doesn't mean the same sort of thing as, let's say, romantic or others. So sorry, you've snagged me on a little hobby horse there. The poet today can use any technique you want. There's masses of techniques available from every tradition in the world, and we are heir to all of them. Rhyme is one of them. And I use rhyme sometimes, and rhyme, when it's done really well, is a fantastic instrument. What else do I want to say? I want to say that if we go back to Pythagoras, the discovery of spatial relationships between spaces on a string and the pressing of those creates harmony. So rhyme is an element of the musicality of poetry. And a lot of poetry has become so conceptual and so abstract and so bound up in its own tradition of trying to be new and novel, that these old things have been forgotten. So I think I'll end by saying there's a book called, I forget the name of the author, an English historian, not The Shock of the New, which is a cliche. He talks about the shock of the old.
Mhm.
I'm going to stop there. Thank you so
Okay.
much. That's a
Thank
pretty
you.
good question.
Okay, well, thank you, Max, for that. And so I think we should wrap up now. And I just
Yeah.
want to I suppose on behalf of everybody, really, to thank you enormously, Richard, for a really rich and moving presentation that's I think it's touched me and touched, I'm sure, others on many levels. So thank you for that and for opening up so many dimensions of the phenomenon, including your sort of very pointed critiques of the existing terminology and some of the existing ways of thinking about it, which
I don't think, I'm not really suggesting that we should abandon the term synchronicity.
No, but
I think I think it was a wonderful, how can I put it? A wonderful discovery at the time, and we're stuck with it, whether we like it or not. It does have a ring to it. So let's go on calling it synchronicity.
Yeah, but it's nice to have these other terms available for lighter occasions or for other occasions, and to change the mood music when we're talking about it. Yeah.
Everybody here, I've been trying to break up the sort of daunting formality of these sessions a bit. I know they are daunting, but once again, I want to say thanks to you, Roderick, and also to the people at PARI, everybody at PARI. I think you're doing a super job, and it's important, the work you're doing, and yeah, let's keep these lines open, and anybody who wants to write to me, I promise I will write back, even if it may not be immediate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you, everyone at PARI, for hosting this series, and thank you everybody who came for your questions and for your participation and interest. So
Great.
Yeah. So thank you.
Perfect.
And,
Thanks so much, Roderick, and
okay.
thank you, Richard, as well. It's been a beautiful series and a really nice end cap. One final announcement, we do have a continuation of the Future Mind series this Wednesday. So it's a conversation with Jonathan Rouse and with Alex Gomez-Marin. So if you're looking for another activity later in the week, please feel free to join us. But thank you so much, and all the participants, thank you as well. The questions really help breathe life into it. So we look forward to seeing you all again in the PARI Center. Thank you.